The sun dipped low over the jagged horizon of the Wyoming Badlands, casting long shadows that stretched like accusing fingers across the dusty plains, where Claire Montgomery stood on the weathered porch of the ranch house she now called home, though it felt more like a prison forged from necessity and regret. She had arrived just 3 weeks prior, her trunk heavy with the remnants of a life shattered by her father's gambling debts, which had swallowed their modest Boston home and left her orphaned in spirit if not in fact, for he had passed in a haze of whiskey and despair, leaving her to fend against the wolves of poverty that nipped at her heels. At 24, Clara was no wide-eyed ingenue. She had seen the cruelties of the world in the leering eyes of creditors and the cold indifference of relatives who turned her away, but nothing had prepared her for the isolation of Bitter Creek Ranch, where the wind whispered secrets through the sagebrush and the sky seemed vast enough to swallow her whole. The marriage to Jedediah Kane had been arranged through a matrimonial agency, a desperate grasp at stability after reading his tears advertisement in the paper. Rancher seeks wife for companionship and ranch duties. No frills, serious inquiries only. She had imagined a gruff but kind man, perhaps weathered by the land but warm in his affections. Yet from the moment she stepped off the stagecoach in the ramshackle town of Bitter Creek, the whispers had begun, curling around her like smoke from a dying fire. That Jedediah Kane, nobody dares touch him, the stage driver had muttered, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt as he handed down her luggage. He's got a mean streak, or worse a curse, stays out there alone, never comes to town kept for supplies, and he don't take his shirt off. Not ever. Something hiding under there, mark my words. Clara had dismissed it as frontier superstition, the kind of tall tales spun in saloons to pass the time, but as she rode the bumpy wagon trail to the ranch, flanked by endless expanses of scrub and rock, a seed of doubt took root in her chest, watered by the driver's parting words, "You watch yourself, missy." Some men are best left untouched. Jedediah had met her at the gate, a towering figure astride a black stallion that snorted impatiently, its coat gleaming like polished obsidian under the midday sun, and he had not dismounted to greet her, merely tipping his wide-brimmed hat with a nod that revealed eyes the color of slate, sharp and unyielding as the mountains in the distance. "Clara," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried the weight of unspoken burdens, "I am Jedediah." Wagons loaded for the ride back. Climb up. No handshake, no welcoming embrace, just a practical efficiency that bordered on coldness, and as she hoisted herself onto the buckboard, her skirts tangling in the effort, she caught the faint scent of leather and sweat clinging to him, a reminder that this was a man forged by hard labor and harder solitude. The ranch house itself was a sturdy affair, built from logs hewn from the nearby pines, with a stone chimney that belched smoke lazily into the air, and inside, it was sparse but clean, a testament to his self-sufficiency, with a cast-iron stove, a rough-hewn table, and 2 bedrooms separated by a thin wall that did little to muffle the creaks of the house settling at night. He showed her to her room without ceremony, pointing out the quilt his mother had sewn before she passed, a faded patchwork of blues and reds that spoke of warmer times, and then he was gone, retreating to the barn to tend the horses, leaving Clara to unpack her few possessions, a Bible from her grandmother, a handful of dresses mended too many times, and a locket containing a curl of her mother's hair, a talisman against the loneliness that now enveloped her like a shroud. Days blurred into one another under the relentless rhythm of ranch life, where dawn broke with the crow of a rooster Jedediah kept for eggs, and Clara rose to stoke the fire, boil coffee strong enough to strip paint, and prepare breakfast from the staples in the pantry of flour, beans, salted pork, and whatever vegetables she could coax from the small garden plot behind the house, where the soil was rocky and unforgiving, much like her husband. Jedediah ate in silence, his fork scraping against the tin plate, and though he thanked her with a gruff "appreciate it," he never lingered, always rising to don his hat and stride out to the corrals, where the cattle lowed plaintively and the wind carried the dust of their hooves. She watched him from the window, admiring the grace with which he swung into the saddle, his broad shoulders straining against the faded blue shirt he wore day in and day out, never changing it in her presence, even when sweat soaked through the fabric during the hottest afternoons. when the sun beat down like a hammer on an anvil. It puzzled her, this peculiar habit, for in Boston, men shed their coats in summer's heat without a second thought, but here, Jedediah remained buttoned to the collar, his sleeves rolled only to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and etched with faint scars that hinted at stories untold. The townsfolk's warnings resurfaced in her mind during those quiet moments, when she scrubbed the floors or mended his socks by lamplight, her needle pricking her finger as she pondered what could make a man so guarded, so averse to the simple vulnerability of baring his skin. Was it vanity, a deformity, or something darker? A mark of violence that scarred not just the body but the soul? She dared not ask, for their conversations were brief and functional discussions of weather, chores, the price of beef at market, and any attempt to probe deeper was met with a shuttered gaze, a tightening of his jaw that signaled the end of talk. Yet, beneath the distance, Clara sensed a flicker of something human, a kindness in the way he left wildflowers on the table one morning after a ride, their petals bruised but beautiful, or how he repaired the loose step on the porch without her asking, his hammer strikes precise and purposeful. It was in these small gestures that hope kindled in her heart, a fragile flame against the chill of his reserve, and she found herself drawn to him despite the barriers, her curiosity morphing into a quiet affection that surprised her with its intensity. One evening, as thunderheads gathered on the horizon, promising a storm that would lash the land with rain and lightning, Clara ventured to the barn, carrying a lantern to light her way through the gathering dusk, the air thick with the scent of impending rain and hay. Jedediah was there, brushing down his horse with long, rhythmic strokes, his shirt clinging to his back from the day's exertions, and for a moment, she hesitated in the doorway, watching the play of muscles under the fabric, the way his hands strong yet gently calmed the animal with a touch. "Supper's ready," she said, her voice softer than intended, and he turned, his eyes meeting hers in the flickering light, a shadow crossing his face that had nothing to do with the dimness. "Be in shortly," he replied, but as he moved to hang the brush, his sleeve caught on a nail, tearing the fabric with a sharp rip that exposed a sliver of skin on his upper arm, a patch marred by a raised, puckered scar that twisted like a river on a map. He yanked the sleeve down immediately, his movements frantic, almost panicked, and Clara's breath caught in her throat, the question bursting forth before she could stop it. "Jedediah, what happened to your arm?" He froze, his back to her, shoulders tense as a bowstring, and the silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. "Nothing you need concern yourself with," he said finally, his tone clipped, a wall slamming down with finality. But Clara, emboldened by the weeks of shared silence, stepped closer, the lantern casting wavering shadows on the hay-strewn floor. "We're married, Jedediah. If there's something troubling you, I want to know. I want to help." He turned then, his eyes stormy, a mix of anger and something deeper, more vulnerably fear, perhaps, or shame. "Help? You think you can fix what's broken in me? This ain't your fairy tale, Clara. You married me for a roof, and I married you for company. That's the deal. Don't go poking where you ain't welcome." His words stung, a lash against her budding hopes, and she retreated to the house, the rain beginning to patter on the tin roof as she set the table with trembling hands, the stew cooling in its pot. That night, as the storm raged outside, lightning illuminating the room in stark flashes, Clara lay awake, listening to the creak of the house and the occasional snort from the barn, her mind racing with possibilities. The scar she had glimpsed was no accident from ranch work. It was deliberate, cruel, the kind inflicted by human hands, and it whispered of a past that haunted him, keeping him armored in cloth and solitude. In the days that followed, the rift between them widened, Jedediah retreating further into his work, riding out before dawn and returning after dark, his meals taken in haste or skipped altogether, while Clara threw herself into the garden, her hands blistering as she turned the soil, planting seeds that might bloom into something beautiful amid the barrenness. Yet, the mystery gnawed at her, fueling dreams where she peeled back his shirt to reveal not horror, but a heart beating in rhythm with her own, and she began to see cancers in subtle ways, overhearing snippets in town when she rode in for supplies, where the shopkeeper, a wiry man named Harlan with a mustache like a broom, leaned over the counter and confided, Kane's pa was a fire and brimstone preacher, mean as a rattlesnake, beat the boy senseless, they say, trying to drive out demons that weren't there. Jed ran off at 16, but the scars, well, they don't fade easy. Clara's heart ached with the revelation, pieces falling into place like a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving, and she returned to the ranch with the resolve hardening in her chest, determined to bridge the chasm, to show him that touch could heal as well as harm. The opportunity came during a brutal heat wave that baked the land, turning the grass to brittle straw and the creek to a trickle, when Jedediah collapsed in the corral after a day of branding calves, his face flushed and body limp from heat stroke. Clara found him there, sprawled in the dust, and without hesitation, she dragged him to the shade of the barn, her muscles straining as she loosened his collar, splashing water from the trough onto his face until his eyes fluttered open, dazed but alive. "What happened?" he murmured, trying to sit up, but she pressed him back, her hands firm on his shoulders. "You fainted from the heat. You need to cool down." In his weakness, he didn't resist as she unbuttoned the top of his shirt, revealing the upper chest etched with a lattice of scars, burns from hot irons, welts from whips, a testament to years of torment that made her stomach churn with pity and rage. He realized too late, his hand shooting up to cover himself, but Clara caught it, holding it gently. "Don't," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "I've seen worse in the world, Jedediah, but nothing as brave as surviving it." He stared at her, the vulnerability raw in his gaze, and for the first time, he didn't pull away. His breath ragged as old walls crumbled. "My father. He thought I was the devil's spawn, beat me every day, said it was God's work. I hid it all these years, afraid it'd scare folks off, make me untouchable." Clara's heart broke and mended in that moment, her fingers tracing a scar lightly, not in revulsion but in reverence. "You're not untouchable to me," she said, and as the sun set on that scorching day, something shifted between them, a tentative bridge built on shared secrets, promising that the chapters ahead might hold healing in their pages. The ranch, once a place of isolation, began to feel like a sanctuary as Clara and Jedediah navigated the fragile terrain of trust, with her learning to tend not just the land but the wounds of his past, and him discovering that love could flourish even in the harshest soil, their story unfolding like the wildflowers that bloomed after the rain.